Hey, what's up guys? Joel Adams with Iridesium, and today we're going to be taking a look at creating explosions for still frame images in Blender. The great thing about this approach to creating explosions is that you save a lot of baking time and resolution. Plus, you get full control over how your explosion ends up looking. You can create fire and smoke assets with this technique just as well as explosions. So, with that being said, let us jump right in. I'm going to start by adding in an icosphere and adding a subdivision surface modifier, scaling it up a little bit, set the subdivision surface to 2. Then add in a displacement. This one we're going to add a cloud texture to and turn up the size just a little bit. Then I'm going to go ahead and add another displacement on this one. We are going to go ahead and leave it without a texture. This will add a bulge to all the mesh data that is underneath. Then I'm going to go ahead and tweak both displacements, turn the top one down and the bottom one as well in strength. I'm going to go ahead and turn the detail for the first displacement all the way down to 1, and that will allow us to turn the bulge displacement up quite a bit. Now I'm going to add another subdivision surface and another displacement modifier. I am going to hit new texture on the displacement. This one is going to be Voronoi. I'm going to turn the scale of the Voronoi texture quite a bit down and just make sure to invert the strength so we get bubbles instead of craters. Then I'm going to turn the strength for the Voronoi, or Voronoi, however you pronounce it, down. And that's looking pretty good. I'm going to continue adjusting these displacements a little bit till I get exactly what I want. You can mess around with the mid-level of the bulge displacement, and that will give you different kinds of bulge. Now I'm going to go ahead and keep messing with these until I get what I want, turning up the base displacement and messing with the other subdivision surfaces. So adding one more displacement on top of all these, I'm going to set it to clouds and turn its size down significantly so it's almost more like grain. Turn its strength down quite a bit too. Alright, that looks pretty good. Then now basically I'm just going to add a render view and a node editor so we can begin working on the materials. Alright, so switch over to material and hit new to create a new material. I am going to add a world background as a sky texture just to give us some basic lighting in the scene. And I'm going to start by deleting the diffuse shader and adding in an emission shader that I will plug directly into the volume input on the material output. Now I'm going to just turn the max transparency all the way up. Try to keep your mesh from insiding out. Keep the displacements from causing the mesh to inside out. That will give you little artifacts in your render. I'm going to go ahead and add in a texture node to our material and a color ramp in between the texture and plug it into the emission shader. Then I'm going to crank up the contrast a bit. Now I'm going to turn up the distortion on the noise texture significantly. Then I'm going to paint in the color of my fireball on this color ramp. Go ahead and turn the strength of the emission up to 5 and continue refining the color of your fireball. I went ahead and added in a hot white at the front just to make our explosion a little brighter. Here I am just turning up the detail a little bit and the scale of the flame on the inside of the explosion up just slightly. Now I'm going to go ahead and make the unburned fuel on the outside of the fireball. So go ahead, Shift A, Mix Shader. Then I'm going to add in a transparency shader, also a diffuse shader after I plug the transparency into the bottom socket of the mix shader. Add in a texture, noise texture. This I'll plug into the FAC of the mix shader and add a converter ramp in between the FAC and the noise texture. Crank up the contrast here as well so you can begin to see the shapes on the outside of your fireball for the unburned fuel. Then again, just play with the size, detail, and distortion values of the noise texture till you get what you want. You want to keep the contrast here pretty high. Then I'm going to duplicate the noise texture and duplicate the color ramp. This is just going to add some finer unburned fuel particles. So I'm going to go ahead and add a mix, which is set to multiply, to mix these two together. turn up the noise scale a bit. I'm going to go ahead and plug the multiply node into the diffuse color. Then just paint in a little bit of red in between so that you get the nasty red color of gasoline or some oils. And you can continue tweaking all the settings on this node setup until you get the fireball that you like. And you should be ready for the next step, which is sculpting the explosion out of this asset. So I'm going to turn off some of the modifiers to make the scene a little bit quicker, add in a ground plane so we can get an idea of where our floor is, and just begin duplicating this explosion and placing it with Alt-D so that any settings you change on the original one will carry over to all the others. So here I'm just basically duplicating it, scaling it, rotating it, and sculpting the shape of an explosion that I want just by randomly placing this one asset over and over again. Now I'm going to add in a sun lamp just so that we can get some basic lighting in our scene. Then I'm going to go ahead and give the floor plane a texture that isn't white, just something darker and not terribly distracting. And pick an angle to render this explosion from. Then I'm going to go ahead and turn on Simplify. This will just allow us to have some more speed in the viewport. And I'm going to make some smaller versions of this asset around the explosion to give some more detail and just break up the large bubbles of the main explosion. So now I'm going to go ahead and create a flame asset. Basically, I'm just going to add in a cube, scale it down on the Z significantly, add the fireball material that we created. Then I'm just going to go into edit mode and kind of mess it up a little bit, make it a little messed up, and scale the end higher than the front. Then just place it on the explosion and we'll work on its material. Duplicate the material so that it's a separate version of the fireball material. Then basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut off the unburned fuel side and leave it at just fire. Then turning down the noise size of the fire, you can get the flame that you are looking for. So that looks pretty good. With our fire asset done, I am going to begin rotating it and placing it all around the explosion. I am also going to go ahead and add a displacement modifier on it just so that it breaks up the fire and makes it a little more random. So just place it all over your explosion wherever you like it to get some random fire here and there. Nice thing about this fire asset is it is 3D, so you can render this explosion out in all angles. So right here I'm just adding a little bit of unburned fuel to the bottom of the fireball asset just so that a flame looks like it is burning up. Then I'm going to add some wet reflective puddles onto the ground plane so that we get some reflections of the fire in the floor. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of compositing in Blender. However, I suggest never using Blender's compositor if you can avoid it. It's always better to do your compositing in After Effects or Photoshop because those tools are much more powerful and much more flexible. Alright, so the last thing I'm going to add in is some arms of the explosion as if it's blown away some debris. We all know fireballs are extremely destructive, so I'm going to add some fireball arms reaching out of the explosion, and when you're done with that, you should have something like this. In a future tutorial, I hope to show you how to make gas explosions as a simulation so that you can have your own VFX assets as well. Thank you for watching. This is Iridesium. Bye.